The gangway shook under Bryn Harlan's feet when Troy Bancroft lifted her overnight bag and dropped it onto the dock below. He didn't throw it. That would have looked worse on a Saturday morning at Harborside Marina, with families loading coolers onto sailboats. 20 slips down and a dockhand close enough to hear everything. He simply set it down with a finality that said everything his words had not. "You're not on the manifest," Troy said. Bryn had Fern strapped to her chest in a pale yellow carrier. The baby was 7 months old and had learned somewhere in the last week to grip fabric with both fists when she felt uncertain. Fern had both fists buried in Bryn's jacket now. "What do you mean I'm not on the manifest?" Bryn kept her voice low. "You told me to pack for 2 weeks. You told me this was for all 3 of us." Troy's gaze moved to the water beside the slip. Not to the baby, not to Bryn's face. To the water, the way a man looks at something he's already decided to stop thinking about. "The doctor said your anxiety was still elevated. I don't think a long passage is good for you right now. You didn't tell me this before we drove 2 hours to get here." I didn't want to argue in front of the baby. Kirsten Albright appeared at the top of the gangway with a tray of coffee cups. She was Troy's project manager at Bancroft Development, and she had been photographed at his side for the better part of a year. Her hair was down. She wore a linen shirt that Bryn had never seen before, and a look of careful nothing when their eyes met. "I can call your mother," Troy said, as if that settled something. "She can pick you up. You and Fern will be more comfortable at home." Bryn looked at the bag on the dock. Inside it were 2 weeks of Fern's formula, the pediatrician's emergency contact card, the small white noise machine Fern couldn't sleep without. Troy had packed the bag himself the night before, told her it was because she looked tired and he wanted to help. She had thanked him. "You're taking the company boat," Bryn said. "You told the marina this is a business trip." Troy fixed the cuff of his jacket. "It's a working holiday." "With Kirsten." He looked at her directly then. His expression was the one she had spent 3 years learning to read. The careful blankness he wore when he had already made a decision and was waiting for her to accept it as hers. "Don't make this about her." The yacht's engine turned over. A deckhand untied the stern line. Kirsten retreated inside the cabin. Troy walked back up the gangway, unhooking it behind him, and the gap between the dock and the boat opened like a mouth. Bryn did not cry. Fern made a small, questioning sound against her collarbone. Bryn pressed one hand flat against her daughter's back. "Your bag is on the dock," she said. Her voice came out steadier than she expected. Troy did not answer. He did not look back. The Bancroft Development logo on the hull caught the morning sun as the yacht eased out of the slip, and then the engine sound changed, and the boat moved toward open water. And Bryn stood on the dock with one overnight bag, 40% battery on her phone, and a 7-month-old who had pressed her cheek against her mother's chest and gone very still. A woman came to stand beside her. She was somewhere in her early 60s, wearing a dark blazer despite the heat, carrying a slim leather portfolio. She had the posture of someone who had delivered difficult news many times and had learned not to soften it with unnecessary noise. "Mrs. Bancroft," the woman said. Bryn turned. "My name is June Whitmore. I'm an attorney. I've been waiting to speak with you for some time, and I think right now may be the right moment." "Did Troy send you?" "No." June looked at the yacht moving toward the harbor mouth. "Your grandmother did." Bryn's grandmother, Edith Harland, had died 16 months ago, 8 months before Fern was born. She had been the kind of woman who kept everything in order and explained nothing, who settled bills and planted gardens and pressed checks into people's hands without naming what the checks were for. Bryn had loved her completely, and understood her imperfectly, and missed her in ways that still arrived sideways, at unexpected moments, the way grief does when you weren't prepared for how large the person was. "My grandmother is gone," Bryn said. "She left instructions," June said. "She asked me to watch for a specific set of circumstances and to find you when they arose." She paused. "I've been watching for 2 years." Fern shifted against Bryn's chest. The dockhand passed behind them pushing a cart. June waited without hurrying. "What circumstances?" Bryn asked. "She asked me to come to you if Troy Bancroft left you without transportation, without access to money, or without the means to care for your child." June held Bryn's gaze. "This is the 3rd time I've driven to this marina. The first 2 times, he didn't go through with it." Bryn thought of the 2 vacations in the past year that Troy had canceled at the last minute. He'd had reasons both times, reasonable ones. She had believed them because she had been tired, and because believing was easier than the alternative. She picked up the overnight bag from the dock. "Where would I go?" she asked. "Somewhere safe," June said. "And then, when you're ready, we're going to open your grandmother's file." The file was a sealed envelope with Edith Harlan's handwriting on the front. Bryn recognized the blue ink and the particular way her grandmother wrote the letter B, slightly rounder than you'd expect, like she was being careful with it. "Do not open until you need it more than you need to be thought reasonable." Bryn read the line 3 times in the passenger seat of June's car before she pulled the envelope open. Inside was a letter, a set of property documents, and the deed to a 6-story commercial building in the Meridian District, 4 miles from the house where Troy and Bryn had lived for 3 years. The letter was dated 14 months before Edith died. "Bryn, my love, if you're reading this, you have arrived at a moment I hoped would not come but prepared for anyway, because you were raised by your mother to be hopeful and I was raised by mine to be prepared. The Meridian building has been in this family for 30 years. I placed it in trust for you because I knew by the time you were 30 that your instinct is to give people more trust than they've earned. That is a beautiful thing in a mother. It can be a dangerous thing in a marriage. The building is yours outright. It has never belonged to anyone else. If someone has told you otherwise, or if someone has borrowed against it, or signed documents in your name, I want you to call June Whitmore, who has the rest. She has your father's integrity and sharper elbows. Trust her with the facts. Trust yourself with the decisions. All my love, Gran." The rental income from the Meridian building was $21,000 a month. Every floor was leased. Bryn had never received $1 of it. June drove and let Bryn read. She didn't ask what the letter said. She had already read the trust documents, the property records, and 3 years' worth of bank statements that Bryn had never been shown. "He told me the family trust was empty," Bryn said. "He told me that the year we got married. He sat at a table with an accountant and showed me statements." "The statements were for a different entity," June said. "A holding company your grandmother dissolved years before she died. The Meridian Trust was never part of that." "How did he know about it?" "He didn't, at first. Your grandmother's attorney at the time made an error and included the property in a disclosure during a routine estate review. She corrected it, but Troy had already seen the document. Bryn absorbed that. He spent 3 years trying to get control of it," June said. "He started with your joint accounts. When that wasn't enough, he went after the building itself. Troy had used the Meridian building as collateral for a construction loan 18 months ago. The loan financed a luxury development project in the waterfront district. He had done it using a power of attorney document bearing Bryn's signature. Bryn had not signed it. The signature had been lifted from a joint mortgage refinancing form they had signed together in the 2nd year of their marriage. Someone had photographed the signature page, isolated her name, and layered it onto a new document. A notary Bryn had never met had certified it. Bryn sat with that information, the way you sit with something too heavy to fully pick up. She thought of the night Fern was born, the 31 hours of labor, the 2 a.m. moment when the nurses had told her. Troy wasn't in the waiting room anymore. He had texted from the parking garage, "Getting some air. You're doing great." He had returned 40 minutes later. She had been too exhausted to ask where he had gone. She had not known, until now, that a notary office 2 blocks from the hospital had been open late that night for a scheduled appointment. "He signed the loan documents while I was in labor," Bryn said. "Yes," June said. The construction loan was $4.2 million. The Meridian building's rental income had been diverted to service it through an LLC called Coastal Meridian Partners. The LLC was registered to Kirsten Albright's older brother. Kirsten had signed as its managing agent. The building's tenants had been paying their rent on time every month. They had no idea their payments were being rerouted. Fern was asleep by the time June pulled into the parking structure of a hotel she had already reserved under the trust's account. A crib had been set up in the room. Formula was waiting in a small cooler on the desk. Bryn stood in the doorway and looked at the crib and felt the same unsettled clarity she had felt on the dock. The sensation of watching a plan that was not hers finally make itself visible. She put Fern down without waking her. Then she sat at the desk and read every document in June's portfolio. The forged power of attorney was one layer. Below it was a second, a board resolution from Bancroft Development, dated 6 weeks ago, approving Kirsten Albright's promotion to Executive Vice President of Strategic Acquisitions. The resolution named Kirsten as Troy's succession designee. It had been approved at a meeting Bryn had not been informed of, because she was not on the board. She was not on the board because Troy had told her, when she asked 3 years ago, that her name on any company document would complicate the trust issues they were working to resolve. The trust issues he had been manufacturing. Kirsten was 12 weeks pregnant. This was documented in the company's insurance enrollment update, which one of June's paralegals had obtained through a separate process. Bryn chose not to ask too many questions about. Troy had planned a private ceremony for September at a vineyard in the Hill Country. The event planner's contract was in the file. It listed Troy Bancroft and Kirsten Albright as the couple. The contract had been drafted while Bryn was still in the hospital recovering from a postpartum hemorrhage that had kept her for 4 days after Fern was born. The deposit had been paid through Coastal Meridian Partners. With Bryn's rental income, she closed the portfolio. Outside the hotel window, the afternoon light had shifted to the flat gold of late afternoon. Fern breathed steadily in the crib. Bryn's phone had 19 messages. 2 from her mother, asking where she was. 14 from Troy, starting with "call me" and escalating through variations on the same theme. 3 from numbers she didn't recognize, which she did not open. She sent her mother a short message, "Safe, with an attorney. We'll explain soon. Please don't tell Troy." Then she called June. "He'll file for custody as soon as he knows I have a lawyer," Bryn said. "He filed this morning," June said. Before the yacht left the marina, his attorney filed an emergency petition, claiming you had abandoned the family home with the child. Bryn let the silence hold for a moment. "He filed custody papers before he dropped my bag on the dock." "Yes." She pressed her free hand flat against the desk. This was the detail that rearranged everything, that turned what had felt like a sudden cruelty into something that had been measured and timed. Troy had not lost his temper at the marina. He had executed a plan. He had stood on that gangway and dropped her bag the same way he had arranged a notary appointment and signed a construction loan and drafted a wedding contract. Everything deliberate. Everything done while she was occupied with something he had made her feel was more important. Her anxiety, the baby, the distance between them that he had named as hers to fix. She had spent 3 years fixing a distance he had deliberately placed there. June's voice was steady. "The custody filing claims you are experiencing postpartum instability and have exhibited erratic behavior. It includes a statement from the marina's front desk employee saying you were observed in a state of distress." "I was in a state of distress. My husband dropped my bag on a dock and left on a yacht with his project manager." The statement doesn't include that context. Bryn thought of the employee, a young man who had looked away when Troy and Bryn were talking. He had looked away the way people do when they've been told to look away, and then been told not to call it that. "The marina has cameras," Bryn said. "Yes, it does," June said. "I've already submitted a preservation request." The footage showed everything. Troy lifting the bag dropping, the gangway withdrawing, Kirsten at the top of the stairs with a coffee tray, Bryn standing still on the dock, one hand pressed to her daughter's back, not erratic, not unstable. Just a woman at the exact moment she understood what her marriage had been. The family court judge reviewed the footage on the following Tuesday and denied Troy's emergency custody request. She ordered a standard review period and appointed a parenting coordinator. She noted, in her written order, that the petitioner's claim of maternal instability was not consistent with the documented record. Troy's attorney pivoted immediately. He filed a motion claiming the Meridian building had been jointly acquired during the marriage and therefore constituted marital property subject to division. The trust documents predated the marriage by 6 years. June submitted them with a single cover letter. What followed was not a dramatic confrontation in a wood-paneled courtroom. It was quieter than that, and in some ways harder. It was depositions and document requests and spreadsheets printed on long paper that had to be turned sideways to read. It was Bryn, sitting in a conference room across from Troy's attorneys and answering every question about her mental health history, her prescription records, her relationship with her mother, the number of times she had cried in the last year. She answered all of it. She had cried 81 times in the last year. She knew because she had kept a journal, at her therapist's suggestion, and she had brought the journal. The number was not evidence of instability. It was evidence of a woman who had spent a year grieving things she had been told were not happening. Troy appeared at one deposition looking less certain than she had ever seen him. He had always carried authority the way some men carry height, naturally, without effort, as if the room adjusted to him rather than the other way around. He looked, for the first time, like a man in a room that was not adjusting. The investigator's report landed 6 weeks after the marina. It documented $4.2 million in construction loan, draws collateralized against the Meridian building, without the owner's authorization. It documented $380,000 in rental income, diverted through Coastal Meridian Partners over 22 months. It documented a forged power of attorney and identified the notary, who subsequently surrendered her license and provided a signed statement, explaining what she had been paid and by whom. Kirsten provided her own statement under separate counsel. She said Troy had told her. Bryn had agreed to the building arrangement. She said she had believed him because she had wanted to. She said she now understood that wanting to believe something is not the same as having reason to. Bryn read that line and felt nothing sharp, only a long, tired recognition. She had also wanted to believe things. The difference was she had not signed documents. The Board of Bancroft Development received the investigator's report on a Thursday. By Friday morning, 3 of the 5 directors had called for a special session. Troy had spent years building his company's reputation on a specific kind of trust, investor relationships, lender confidence, municipal contracts that required clean records. The forged power of attorney and the diversion through Coastal Meridian Partners threatened all of it. Bryn was not at the board meeting. She was at a park 2 miles away, sitting on a blanket with Fern in the shade, watching her daughter make very serious attempts to eat a crinkle toy. June texted her updates. Motion to suspend executive authority passed 4-1. Access to company accounts frozen pending audit. Troy walked out before the vote was certified. Bryn put her phone face down on the blanket. A breeze moved through the oak trees above them. Fern looked up at the leaves with the absolute concentration of a person discovering that the world is larger than she thought. Bryn watched her daughter and felt the afternoon settle around them, like something that had finally decided to stay. Troy called 17 times that evening. She sent each call to voicemail. After the 14th, she sent a text. Any communication about Fern goes through the parenting coordinator. Everything else goes through my attorney. He texted back. You think you won something. You don't understand what you've done. She did not respond. She understood exactly what she had done. She had stopped participating in an arrangement she had not been told she was in. The civil proceedings moved faster than the criminal investigation, which was still ongoing when Bryn returned to work for the first time in 2 years. She had been a landscape architect before Fern was born. She designed public parks and private gardens and 3 school courtyards in the years before Troy told her it would be better for the baby if she stepped back. She had believed him because she loved her daughter, and because it is very easy to dress a request in the clothes of love. She rented a small studio office 2 blocks from the Meridian building. The building's property manager, a practical woman named Dolores, who had been managing the property since Edith Harland owned it directly, transferred the rental accounts to Bryn's name within a week of the court's preliminary ruling. She handed Bryn a folder of tenant contacts, maintenance schedules, and lease renewals and said, "Your grandmother would be pleased." Bryn had pressed her lips together and nodded, and waited until Dolores left to cry, briefly, with her forehead against the cool surface of her new desk. She set up a consultation practice. Her first client was a city parks department, looking to redesign a flood-prone green space on the south side. She spent 3 evenings that week doing site surveys after Fern was asleep, and she drove home those nights with the windows down. And she did not call anyone to tell them where she was going or when she'd be back, because for the first time in years, she was the only person who needed to know. The parenting order gave Bryn primary physical custody of Fern, with a structured schedule for Troy. His access was supervised initially, conditional on the completion of a financial transparency assessment. He was prohibited from removing Fern from the state and from discussing the legal proceedings in any form with the child. He had not yet made the first support payment. His attorneys said he was in the process of restructuring. June said the court would revisit the schedule if payments weren't made. Bryn said she would give it 30 days, and she did not say it with anger, only with the flat certainty of someone who has learned to prefer facts to emotions when dealing with people who use emotions as leverage. Troy's mother, Candace Bancroft, called once. She asked Bryn to consider what she was doing to the family. Bryn listened to the full sentence. Then she said, "I considered what was being done to my daughter. That's what I'm acting on." Candace said that Bryn had always been difficult. Bryn said that she was going to end the call now, and she did. She did not feel good about it. She felt clear, which was different, and she had learned, more durable. The criminal investigation concluded the following spring. Troy was charged with fraudulent use of a financial instrument, forgery of a legal document, and misappropriation of trust property. The notary entered a plea agreement. Kirsten's brother, the registered agent of Coastal Meridian Partners, cooperated with prosecutors in exchange for a reduced charge. His cooperation included records showing that Troy had told him Bryn had authorized everything. Troy declined to enter a plea. His defense would take another 8 months. Bryn was not waiting for it. She redesigned the flood-prone park. The project took 11 months, involved 3 community hearings, and required her to learn more about stormwater retention than she had anticipated. She went to every hearing. She answered every question from residents who had watched that park flood for 12 years and were tired of being told it was complicated. On the day the park reopened, Fern was 14 months old and had recently mastered walking, by which she meant that she walked in straight lines with enormous commitment until she reached an obstacle, and then sat down and looked at it. Bryn brought her to the ribbon cutting and held her on her hip while the park's director said a few words, and a woman whose backyard had flooded every spring for a decade shook Bryn's hand and said, "Thank you for seeing us." Bryn thought of her grandmother. She thought of the building. She thought of all the things that had been there, quietly holding their value, while someone tried to convince her the account was empty. She squeezed the woman's hand and said, "I'm glad I could." June came to the park that afternoon with a file folder and an unsentimental smile. She sat beside Bryn on a bench while Fern investigated the new grass with both hands and documented her findings by putting small amounts of it in her mouth. "The trust audit is final," June said. "The misappropriated funds are being recovered in phases. The building is in your name, debt-free, as of yesterday." Bryn looked out at the park. Children were using the new splash pad near the south entrance. A man was walking a dog along the path that curved around what used to be a standing water problem and was now a rain garden planted with native sedge. "Gran knew," Bryn said. "She knew something," June said. "She didn't know the details. She knew the shape of the risk. She knew I wouldn't see it in time." June didn't argue with that. "She knew you would need someone to hold the door while you found your way out." Bryn thought about that for a long time. She thought about the difference between someone holding a door and someone choosing the direction. She thought about every decision she had made in the past year. The hotel room, the attorney, the studio office, the park project, the 30 days she had given Troy before instructing June to file the enforcement motion, and how each of those had been hers. Not handed to her, not arranged for her, arrived at, through the particular exhaustion that comes when you finally stop spending energy on a version of the world that isn't true. Fern walked toward the splash pad with the expression of a person who has made an important decision. "She's going in," June said. "She is," Bryn said, and stood up to follow. The Meridian building was fully occupied by the end of that year. Bryn hired a small management firm and reviewed every lease herself. She established a payment account in the trust's name. She set up a separate account for herself. Her name was on both. She opened a community program through the building's ground floor space, an initiative offering legal consultations and financial literacy workshops for people navigating domestic financial abuse. She did not call it a program about leaving. She called it a program about knowing. The first workshop drew 14 people. The third drew 40. By the end of the year, June was teaching 1 session a month on document preservation, account access, and the specific and common ways that financial information is withheld from people whose names appear on the assets. One evening after a session, a woman asked Bryn how she had stayed calm through everything. Bryn thought about that honestly. "I don't think I was calm," she said. "I think I was precise. There's a difference. Calm is a feeling. Precision is a practice. When I was frightened, I asked what the next specific true thing I needed to do was. And then I did that. The woman nodded slowly. And if you didn't know the next thing? Then I called June. She had not been rescued from her life. That distinction mattered to her more than almost anything that had happened in the preceding year. A woman with a leather portfolio had been standing on a dock when she needed someone, and that woman had carried her grandmother's instructions and sharp elbows and a habit of not softening difficult information unnecessarily. She had offered Bryn transportation, legal guidance, and a room with a crib already set up. She had not offered to make the decisions. Bryn had made the decisions, all of them. At the hotel desk in the middle of the night, reading the documents. In the deposition room, answering the questions. At her new studio, unlocking the door on the first morning, and standing there in the empty space that smelled of paint and old wood and the particular possibility of a room that hasn't been anything yet. She kept her grandmother's letter in the top drawer of her desk, next to the deed to the Meridian building, and Fern's most recent pediatric report, which noted that the patient was healthy, curious, and in the habit of testing the structural integrity of anything left within reach. Bryn thought that sounded right for a Harland woman. The spring after the park reopened, she drove out one Saturday, with Fern strapped in the back, windows down, a travel mug of coffee in the cup holder, no particular schedule. She parked near the Meridian building and walked around its perimeter, the way she used to walk the sites of her projects, slowly, noting what was holding, and what needed attention, and what was simply good. The building was good. It had been good for 30 years, solid and ordinary, and quietly useful, while her grandmother had paid taxes on it, and kept the leases current and planned, with the careful foresight of someone who understood that love sometimes takes the form of infrastructure for the day her granddaughter would need it to be there. Fern said something emphatic from the stroller. Bryn looked down at her daughter. Fern was pointing at the building's front entrance, with the full certainty of a 14-month-old, who has decided a thing is interesting and is informing the world of this fact. "That's ours," Bryn said. Fern said something else, equally emphatic. That was not yet a word, but carried the full weight of agreement. Bryn pushed the stroller to the entrance, held the door open, and walked inside. The lobby was simple: marble floors, high ceilings, a security desk where the morning guard looked up and nodded. Everything that belonged to them, everything that had always been theirs. She had not needed to be rescued. She had needed someone to make sure the door was still there when she was finally ready to walk through it herself. She walked through it. Fern waved at the security guard. He waved back. The morning light came through the tall front windows and lay flat and gold across the floor, and Bryn Harland stood in the middle of it, with her daughter and her deed and the quiet, solid knowledge that no one would decide the destination this time. The choice, as it had always been, was hers.